I'm nobody, I murmured. The woman sitting across from me at the grim peeling metal table didn't need me to tell her that. She never asked my name, just glanced at me with a dismissive air, as though pondering whether I had any utility at all. Just, did you earn a day? Another worn-out girl slumped in the chair before her. 15 years. You belonged to me for 15, she stated flatly. If the cops had nabbed you, you might have gotten 20. Maybe parole in 6. So why 15 instead of 6? I asked, not sure why I cared anymore, but knowing any sign of weakness would be a grave mistake. Because it wasn't the police who found you, it was him, she said with a wave of her hand, dismissive, and whether you realize it or not, that was a death sentence. I opened my mouth to protest, but no words came. She was stating a harsh truth, plain and unvarnished. I had been dead, entombed in a cold cellar of a house. I knew, without doubt, that I had died. My life had ended, and no one had cared. The only person who might have noticed I was gone lay buried beside me. Who is he? I finally managed to ask. It doesn't matter, does it? She replied coolly. What matters is you were dead the moment you set foot in that house. There was no denying it. The white-haired man had taken down Duarte so effortlessly, I still couldn't grasp how he did it, even though I'd witnessed it all. I'd seen my share of fights, but this was something else entirely. It was like watching a lion pounce in a nature documentary, or a crocodile suddenly emerge from the water. He had outsmarted us. The limp and stiffness that had caught my attention, convincing me he was an easy mark, had been a ruse. Whenever I recalled that moment, I could still feel it. The rush of terror and surprise, like when you're on the edge of sleep and suddenly jerk awake, feeling like you're falling. Your leg kicks out, your heart races, and for a split second, you struggle to calm down and relax. But I couldn't calm down. I wasn't in bed, and there would be no waking up from this nightmare. I was trapped in a small room with a real predator. I managed to suppress my panic just enough to attempt a desperate escape, only to find the door inexplicably locked, sealing my fate. When I turned back, he stood motionless over Duarte's crumpled, bloodied form, not even out of breath. There was no doubt about it. This was the end. I was about to be killed, and no one would ever know or care what happened to me. I was so shocked by how swiftly everything had changed that I went numb. No fear, no panic, just a grim acceptance of whatever fate awaited me. But it hadn't come to pass. For his own reasons, he had chosen to spare us, though not without leaving Duarte marked, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe death would have been the easier path. The woman seated across the table, her expression grimly amused, conveyed without words that death remained a viable option, perhaps even the preferred one, from her perspective. They called her Donna. That was all anyone ever called her, as if it were more title than name. I waited, uncertain of what would come next. She glanced at a piece of paper, then fixed her gaze back on me, calculating. You do as I say, or we finish what he started. He believes you might be useful as a tracker. Seeing my confusion, she clarified, He thinks you can tail people. I couldn't help but let a faint smile slip. His approval strangely meant something to me. Don't get too comfortable. You're expendable. You know nothing. What matters is that you're untraceable, anonymous. She paused, her gaze cutting through me with cold precision. What matters is that you're nobody. Nobody. They outfitted me with oversized jeans, old tennis shoes, and a sweatshirt before escorting me to a room where they promptly locked me in. I languished in what resembled a dated classroom with painted-over windows for what felt like an eternity. Eventually, one of what I mentally dubbed Donna's Dobermans appeared at the door. With little more than a glance in my direction, he motioned for me to follow him outside, where a worn-out, half-rusted car awaited. Sitting behind the wheel was a skinny, ragged man wearing a faded brown crew cap and a jacket that had seen better days, perhaps 2 decades ago. His expression seemed lost and distant. The Doberman silently walked away towards an alley, leaving me by the car without a word. The driver glanced up, flashing a toothless, half-hearted smile. "Hop in. I'm Tommy, your tour guide." I shrugged and circled around to the passenger seat. Tommy appeared to be somewhere between 30 and 50, his demeanor colorless and fragile, as if he might crumble at any moment. I clumsily settled into the car, brushing aside a couple of hamburger wrappers from the worn leather seat, wary of any surviving rats. Judging by the smell, I suspected they had succumbed to black mold. Once I was seated, Tommy turned to me with eyes that darted nervously, like those of someone on edge. "What should I call you?" "Not, what's your name?" I noted wryly. I pondered for a moment. "Spooky. Just call me Spooky." "Cool. 'S'all good, Spooky. I'm taking you to your new home, the Ritz-Carlton," Tommy quipped with a slightly unhinged half-smile. "Well, maybe not the Ritz, but the doors lock mostly, and the toilets flush, and sometimes you can even get hot water." He scratched his head underneath the faded cap, causing a few strands of light brown hair to escape. Fishing in his jacket, he produced a worn envelope and thrust it towards me. "Your key's in there, and a cash card. There's a PIN number on the back. Also, an unlimited subway card. Your cash card has $500, and it'll be topped up with another $500 every 2 weeks. Enough to survive on, but not exactly enough to thrive." We navigated through a labyrinth of deteriorating streets, each worse than the last, until we arrived at a rundown 1950s motel. The sign was shattered and illegible, and the parking lot was overgrown with dead weeds. Pulling up in front of the main entrance, Tommy pointed to the motel. "There's never anyone at the front desk. You're in room 223, next to Amber." There was a peculiar inflection in his voice when he mentioned Amber, something subtle, yet significant. "How do I—" "You don't. They'll call if they need anything." His paws hung heavily on the word, and for a moment I seriously considered that dead might have been the preferable option. "If they need you, it'll be between 4 and 5 in the morning." "What if I'm not there?" He shrugged indifferently. "I don't know, but I don't think you want them to come looking for you." He departed without another word. I navigated past the unmanned front desk, up the stairs, and down the worn hallway to my room. Inside, the atmosphere was worn and tired. The carpet sported more holes than intact patches, and the desk next to the bed was a tapestry of cigarette burns and coffee stains on its peeling veneer. An ancient liver-colored phone and a stack of maps, Washington, D.C., Arlington, Rosslyn, were its only occupants, practically begging to be perused. The closet boasted a battered door that hung crookedly, and the bathroom lacked a door entirely, save for a fragment dangling from its top hinge. At least there was toilet paper. For an hour I sat on the folding metal chair by the desk, attempting to decipher the maps, when a hesitant knock interrupted my solitude. Standing at the door was a frail, bleached blonde girl with watery eyes. Her garish makeup and gold lame shorts, paired with a white, fur-trimmed jacket, left little doubt about her profession. "You must be Spooky. Tommy mentioned you. I'm Amber," she announced, holding up a white paper bag. "Got some Indian food here. Is that cool?" Her voice had a slight nasal twang, reminiscent of characters from Jersey Shore. Before I could respond, she breezed past me and flopped down on the bed, or as much as her lithe 90-pound frame could manage to flop anyway. She kicked off ridiculously high heels and let out a sigh of relief. She began extracting styrofoam containers from the bag, balancing them precariously on the bed. "We've got chicken vindaloo and chicken vindaloo," she announced with a slightly apologetic smile. "I happen to really like chicken vindaloo, so I didn't want to take any chances on your choice." She then pulled out a couple of bottles of water. Closing the door behind me, I realized I hadn't eaten since before Duarte and I had encountered the white-haired man. I managed a faint smile as I picked up one of the containers and returned to my seat. "Thanks. I'm starving," I admitted. "Confusing, isn't it?" Amber remarked. "Who are they?" I asked cautiously. "We don't ask. Probably not wise," she replied cryptically. "I can see that," I agreed. "Tommy thinks it's some kind of syndicate thing. I think it's industrial espionage. The guys I entertain?" They usually have deep pockets, Amber explained. I had my own suspicions, but I kept them to myself. We fell silent for a while. After so long without food, the spicy vindaloo tasted better than I could have imagined. I stopped only when my plastic spoon scraped against raw styrofoam. Amber set her container aside and reclined on the bed, her legs dangling off the edge. I'm not prying, but you must have really messed up to end up here. We all did. That woman... She shuddered. She's not messing around. I noticed, I replied grimly. She doesn't care what you do when she's not using you. I'm trying to save up some cash. Amber gestured with her spike heel shoe, making it clear how she earned her money. She doesn't care. I shrugged. Thanks for the offer, but that's not my thing. Amber smiled absently at the ceiling. Didn't figure it would be. Just a friendly word of advice, though. Don't get yourself into serious trouble. There was this guy here once, a real tough guy, did muscle work, broke legs, strong-arm stuff. He got pinched for robbery and assault while staying in this very room, actually. Ended up hanging himself in jail. She sat up suddenly, fixing me with a serious gaze. Thing is, he wasn't the type to off himself. Big guy, not scared of prison. Her words sounded rehearsed, almost like a formal caution. I get it, I assured her. No, seriously, she insisted. Tommy's worried you might try to bolt. They'll track you down eventually. I don't have anywhere else to go, I admitted. Amber gave an exaggerated shrug, reminiscent of actresses from old black and white films. Story of my life. Nowhere to run. I leaned forward, intrigued. So, how long have you been here? 2 years ago, I cut a deal with them for 10 years instead of facing a 15-year stretch. I got caught holding a kilo of coke for my boyfriend, and when things went south, he left me hanging, she explained with a mix of bitterness and self-disgust. Public defender said I could plead down, but then she showed up. Amber's voice trailed off momentarily, as if contemplating her choices. She said I could continue doing what I was doing, but for her, promised to make it all disappear. She paused, her gaze focused squarely on me. I do what they say, wear what they tell me to wear, go where they say, and try to make the time in bed as interesting as possible with whoever they tell me to screw. They don't use me that often, maybe once a month, sometimes less. And? I prompted. And nothing, she replied flatly. They don't explain why, they only tell me what I need to know to play my role. What about Tommy? I asked. He's a good guy, Amber said, but there was a peculiar, slightly off-kilter vibe to her words, much like what I sensed from Tommy. But he's a wreck. Speed, I ventured, and a bit of blow sometimes. He's trying to drown it all out, she admitted, looking down at the floor. He used to be an ER nurse. His wife was a nurse too. When she gave birth, the baby was blue. You know what that means, right? It happens when the mother and baby have different blood types. Tommy and his wife had the same blood type. She glanced over at me, a knowing look in her eyes. I nodded in understanding. Tommy figured out which doctor was having an affair with his wife and confronted him right there in the ER, Amber continued, a hint of pride creeping into her voice. Ended up getting 5 years for assault. She got him out of it? I asked, intrigued. No, she didn't, Amber replied sadly. He served 3 years and was paroled, but he was already hooked on drugs when he was a nurse, and when he got caught with speed while on parole, that's when she showed up. Tommy didn't strike me as someone who would have had an easy time in prison. And the doctor? Tommy's wife divorced him while he was in prison, and then married the pig. Or maybe the doctor ended up with the pig. Whatever, Amber said with a slight scowl, a trace of anger in her voice. But Tommy sure made sure that asshole remembered him. The doctor was bigger than Tommy, had him beat real bad until Tommy tackled him over the edge of one of those ambulance beds with the handrail up. Crack? She mimicked the braking motion with her hands and tilted her head in that distinct Jersey girl way. Her voice took on a sing-song tone for a moment. Now the duck's in a wheelchair for life. Her smile widened, a bit too broad. Maybe Tommy had more grit than he let on. The irony wasn't lost on me as I listened to Amber. Tommy's wife had found comfort in another man's bed, leading to their divorce, and Tommy's time behind bars. Now, here he was with a real streetwalker like Amber, and it seemed there was a mutual attraction. "I didn't pry before, but since you asked me," Amber said, leaving the question hanging. "Me and a friend got into some home invasions. A guy got shot. Cops never caught us, but a friend of the guy did," I admitted, the memory sending a chill down my spine. He was the scariest man I've ever seen. He was ready to kill us, but instead, he hurt my friend bad and handed me over to her. "Someone like one of her guards," Amber speculated. I shook my head, feeling a shiver run down my spine. "He makes them look like toy poodles." Amber nodded knowingly. "I've heard about some of the tough cases she deals with. Before she left, Candy used to work my corner. Tommy dropped her off just like he does with me. One time, a pimp threatened her and Tommy. Next thing you know, some guys showed up. That pimp got messed up real bad that night. Broken knees, elbows, trigger fingers, all smashed with hammers." I felt that familiar sensation of falling again. "I think that might be their signature move. That's what happened to my partner." I didn't mention that the white-haired man had forced me to do it to Duarte myself. That it was either that or face death together. Amber studied the worn-out carpet for a moment. "Yeah," she managed a weak smile. "Well, they sure got their point across. They leave me alone." "So what happened to Candy?" I asked, changing the subject. "Her time was up, so she left," Amber replied, a hint of fear and a desperate need to believe in her own words evident in her voice. But neither of us really believed it, not deep down. I forced a smile, knowing it wasn't convincing, but hoping it would suffice. "I'm pretty tired." "Yeah, me too," Amber agreed, gathering up the containers and placing them back in the paper bag. "The dumpster's out front. Housekeeping is non-existent. I haven't seen anyone in 2 years, so if you don't want more bugs, rats, or mice than already live here, you've got to take your trash out yourself." She paused at the door. "It's not all bad. Do your thing, whatever that is, and they mostly leave you alone." "Thanks," I nodded gratefully. "If you ever get bored or just want to hang out, I'm usually around during the day," she offered, pointing towards what I presumed was her room. "Just not on Sundays. Never on Sundays." She walked out barefoot, shoes in hand. Brave girl, considering I wasn't convinced the carpet wasn't a biohazard. I'd slept behind enough dumpsters in recent years to appreciate the irony. She'd been outlining the rules, almost as if she believed someone was listening. It matched what I sensed about Donna's people. I spent my days exploring the city. DC was smaller than Chicago, more navigable by subway. I sought out thrift stores, discount groceries, and pawn shops. Salvation Army clothes swallowed me, transforming me into a raggedy, homeless girl. I aimed to be human debris, something people instinctively avoided noticing. Each morning I woke at 4, waiting for the phone to ring. I wondered if it ever would, or if this was some form of purgatory. Sometimes I entertained the thought that I had died, buried in that basement's dirt floor. During the day, I'd pick up the phone just to hear the dial tone, reassuring myself it still worked. Amber knocked on my door occasionally. "To talk," she'd say, always with food. Indian, Thai, Cuban, Mexican. She exuded the wariness of a rabbit among foxes, always probing, trying to gauge my intentions. Her conversations were stilted, laced with desperation to shield herself and Tommy from any fallout of my decisions. I sensed her uncertainty, her fear of being blamed. She was paralyzed by the dread of taking any risks. I had pegged Amber and Tommy right. On Sundays, they barricaded themselves in her room, shutting out the world until Monday. Occasionally, muffled domestic sounds or laughter leaked through the walls, reminding me they were just ordinary people too. Nearly 2 months passed before the phone finally rang. Its worn-out ring clicked oddly, like it had seen rougher days. Out front, 8 a.m. The line cut off abruptly, replaced by the harsh rasp of a busy signal. I tried to catch more sleep, but rest eluded me. Instead, I lay awake until it was time to leave. When I stepped outside, Tommy sat waiting in his beat-up car. He handed me a photograph. Study him, then give it back. Just follow and report, Tommy instructed, passing me a small black notebook and a couple of pens. Report what? I asked. I'm not sure. Whatever the target does, whatever you observe, maybe. They didn't specify. Target. That word struck a nerve. How long? All week, until Saturday night. There's a phone number inside the notebook. Call every night at midnight and listen. If the plan changes, that's how they'll inform you. The target was staying at a hotel, one of the older, less luxurious ones. Less than an hour after Tommy dropped me off in a secluded alley, I spotted him. For 6 days, I shadowed him through the city's tourist attractions. He seemed determined to visit every museum, memorial, and food cart in sight. Each night I kept vigil at the hotel, observing the housekeeping crew working late on the loading dock, their lively Spanish debates echoing through the night. I watched the night desk clerk sneak out to smoke pot with his girlfriend in a car parked across the street, their laughter mingling with the city's nocturnal hum. 6 nights passed with no activity on the phone number. Unsure of what to report, I meticulously documented his movements, where he ventured, what he ate, what caught his eye. I collected receipts from his dining table, noted the housekeeper's schedules, and even recorded details about the desk clerk's girlfriend, including her bra size, information gleaned from their indiscreet encounters in the car. On Saturday night, I dialed the number for the last time at midnight. This number is not in service if you have dialed it in error. Returning to my hotel room, I waited. At 4 a.m. on Monday, my phone rang. Instructions were curt and clear. Dispose of the notebook. I dropped it into the hat of a weathered black panhandler outside the Capital South Metro station. His weary eyes barely acknowledged me before drifting back to his solitary murmurs. 3 weeks elapsed before my phone buzzed again. This time it was 2 days of following. Then another 4 weeks passed before the next call came. Gradually a pattern emerged over the months that followed. Sometimes it was a day or two. Other times it was a week. Occasionally the notebook included a room key card, and a midnight message would instruct me to retrieve something from the target's room, a laptop, a briefcase, once even a shirt. I would then take the item to a designated spot to meet a van, a plumber's van, a carpet cleaner's, a furniture delivery truck. I'd wait outside, hand over the item, and receive it back after a brief interval, never exchanging a word with the driver. The van drivers changed as frequently as the vans themselves. Once, I recognized one of them as the grizzled old black panhandler, now neatly groomed and wearing an electrician's uniform with a name tag that read Jackson. When he handed me the laptop, he saw the recognition in my eyes and gave me a knowing, wordless wink. Amber and Tommy still worried about me, but I had told them the truth. I had nowhere else to go. Time flew by faster than I expected, and I found myself busier than Amber most of the time. 5 years passed before I saw Donna again. Instead of a 4 a.m. phone call, it was a tap on the door. Tommy was leaning against the doorframe, head down, idly biting his lower lip. She wants to see you. There was no need to clarify who she was, even though we never said her name. He followed me inside and waited. I walked back to my closet and threw a set of clothes on the bed. Tommy stood by while I stripped off the giant t-shirt I slept in and pulled on the fresh clothes. He didn't even seem to notice. He only had eyes for one girl. We walked out to the car in silence and darkness. I didn't bother asking Tommy if he knew what Donna wanted. He wouldn't know, and if he did, he wouldn't be stupid enough to say as we drove through the dark streets. We arrived at another ruined building with painted-over windows and the smell of urine on the steps. Tommy stayed in the car while I walked through the gaping front door and headed toward the only light in the hallway, coming from a single open door. Donna was sitting at a desk identical to the last one I'd seen her at. Or maybe it was the same desk, and they'd brought it for her. The only light came from a single, cordless camping lamp on her table. "Sit." She waved toward an old wooden dining room chair in front of her. One of her bodyguards loomed in the darkness behind her. I sat. Good puppy. She pulled a sheet out of her folder. He was right. You have talent. Your reports are detailed, you improvise well, and you don't panic. She looked back down at the sheet. And you're a ghost. When we've tested you on our own people, they don't even know you're there, even when we tell them to keep an eye out. You may be the best we've ever had. For a fraction of a second, I wondered if she had told the white-haired man. For some reason, I wanted her to. Realizing that shocked me into silence. I hadn't thought about him in a long time. She looked up at me with an arched eyebrow. And you don't talk too much. I just waited, which seemed to be what she wanted. We're going to teach you some things, make you more useful to us. Well, what kinds of things? Security systems, locks, alarms, hotel keycard systems, room search techniques, some methods for copying computer and phone data. She paused. Do you speak any Spanish? Maybe a few words, mostly insults. I saw a hint of a smile flicker at the corner of her mouth. She made a note. Housekeeping crews usually have a lot of Spanish speakers, so you'll learn Spanish. You'll be off for about 6 months. You'll be in New York City. I don't want you training around here. My opinion or thoughts on the matter didn't appear to be necessary or desired, but it was better to warn her now. I never did well in school. She didn't even look up. I know. Dropped out in 9th grade. Shitty home life. Shitty school systems. Your assessment tests from grade school and child services are pretty clear that while you were behind developmentally, it wasn't because you weren't smart enough, but you really are just about as antisocial as it's possible to be without being a sociopath. I stared, trying not to show my surprise. Whoever they were, I was pretty sure it wasn't a simple criminal enterprise. Maybe a really big corporation, but the grinding, queasy feeling in my stomach suggested that was wishful thinking. She continued without pausing. This training makes you more useful, and it will have some benefits for you, if there's something you want. Want. A rush of memories, a flash of sitting in that dimly lit basement across from a man. I want to meet him, talk to him. The words were out before I even knew I was going to speak. She looked up sharply, silent. She knew I was talking about the white-haired man, and she was not happy about it. I realized I'd crossed a line, but didn't know why it was so important to her. After a long moment, she asked, Why? My heart started again. I don't know. He saw me. Nobody else. I just stopped. I didn't even know what I meant by that. She blinked. Twice. We'll see. Maybe. She seemed a little off balance. If you see him, it will probably be the last thing you ever do. There wasn't much point in arguing that. Don't get cocky because of this. Just remember what's important. I know. I'm nobody. She nodded grimly and handed me a bus ticket to New York City, along with a hotel keycard folder. Listen for the phone. For the next 6 months, 6 days a week, I met with Maria and Brandon. I was certain those weren't their real names, just as I knew Rose wasn't mine. Maria taught me Mexican street Spanish 3 days each week. Within 2 weeks, I was only allowed to speak to her in Spanish. And within 2 months, we spent nearly every class in places where only Spanish was spoken. Restaurant kitchens, hotel laundry services, a slaughterhouse. We even visited seemingly endless street fairs. Brandon was clean-cut and athletic. Every day we met, he brought a backpack with something in it, a lock system, a security camera, a mock-up of a sensor, or something else. We spent the day taking it apart and putting it together. He showed me how to beat it or fool it, sometimes with tools, sometimes with electronics. Then he would leave me an address and a time to meet where we would use what I had learned. The scariest thing about Brandon was that I was sure he was military. The way he carried himself, the way he talked. This confirmed what I had suspected. Donna knew that I knew. Tommy and Amber might be able to fool themselves, but I couldn't. I was sure I was right, and if I was, none of us would ever leave. They couldn't risk letting us go. On the other hand, at least I got laid for the first time in 5 years. In all the jobs I'd been on, I'd mostly worked alone, But now I was breaking and entering hotels, businesses, and private houses with Brandon 3 days a week. The rush of getting away with it, of not getting caught, it's very primal, very exciting. The first time we just slipped away from a house, a very, very expensive house with a very, very expensive security system, and were crossing a large golf course. An overpowering wave of desire struck me, and I just pulled him into the trees and started tearing at his clothes. 20 minutes later, we were racing in the shadows along the edge of the greens and fairways, flashing grins at each other like a couple of teenagers. After that first time, it pretty much became a ritual. We never talked about it. Both of us understood that it was more a release of tension than anything personal between us. Then it was over. Maria didn't show up. Brandon didn't show up. And I just got an envelope with a bus ticket back to D.C. in it. The first night I was back, Amber knocked on the door and walked in with a bag of chicken vindaloo as if I'd never been gone. In some ways, nothing changed. Amber, Tommy, 4 a.m. phone calls. In other ways, everything changed. I wasn't just following anymore. Sometimes I was given addresses, times, things to look for, places to break in. I wasn't always working alone anymore either. Sometimes a distraction operation was used. A girl, never one I knew, would hook up with the target and keep him occupied while I searched his room, his car, or used a device to clone his phone. The sheer number of different girls meant Donna's organization was far larger than I'd thought. Brandon had talked about this kind of thing. The girls were called swallows. At first it was a little odd, quietly copying a laptop while listening to a couple in the next room, talking dirty, moaning, and screaming. I suppose it was inevitable. One of the swallows was keeping the target very loudly and vigorously occupied in the bedroom while I did my part. From the squealing and gasping, the guy must have been rougher than usual, and I felt a twinge of sympathy for the girl. I heard the target imperiously order the girl to get him a drink from the hotel room bar just as I was almost done cloning the SIM card from his phone. She strolled out of the bedroom, stark naked. She was a wreck, mascara, eyeshadow, and lipstick streaking down her face. Amber. She looked right at me but didn't say or do anything. She didn't even acknowledge me, just quietly mixed a drink and carried it back to the bedroom. That night, she knocked on my door. She was freshly scrubbed, wearing a bathrobe, and carrying a bag I recognized as the type that usually contained a couple slices of Tivoli's chocolate cake. "Hey, Spooks, want some dessert?" I just stood back and let her walk in. She looked a little frailer, a little more vulnerable without her makeup. She pulled 2 small, ribbon-tied white cardboard boxes out of the bag and handed me one before sitting on the bed. "Love Tivoli's." We sat on the bed, eating the rich cake wordlessly. As she finished, she sighed contentedly and then looked at me seriously. "It's all pretend. You know that, don't you?" I shrugged. She glanced back toward her room. "It is spooky. Think about it. I sell fantasies. To make it work, I have to pretend there's some kind of human connection. Something emotional. Pretend to enjoy it. Pretend to be or feel whatever it is they want. That's what most of them want." She pulled her feet up to sit cross-legged, huddled under her robe. "Then there are guys like Morton Gallagher, Esquire, born with more money than God. He wants to be the big tough guy, so he picks up a girl a little smaller, maybe a little scared-looking, somebody who makes him feel like a big man." I waited for her to go on. "So I look a little nervous, wear makeup that isn't waterproof, so it runs. Squeal and moan like he's too much man for me." She smiled crookedly. "Think how funny that is." She gestured down between her thighs. "We're made to push a 20-inch long, 10-pound baby out through there. Do you really think Morty's 6 inches of steel can really hurt if I use a little KY?" I smiled at that. "Maybe not." "Gallagher is all about the big man thing. Makes me fix him a ginger ale highball before we start, halfway through, and then at the end." "A highball?" "I think it's a thing he got from his dad. One of those passed down from father to son things that guys have. He always starts off tripping on something anyway. By the time I leave, he's usually pretty out of it. I always roll him on his side so he doesn't choke if he throws up. I don't think she'd like that. Probably not. She gave me a helpless look. This is what I do. Tommy understands. He drives, treats bullet holes, knife cuts, and overdoses for them. Sometimes he has to get rid of the ones that didn't make it. That's what he does. And he knows what I do. He knows I can't be what he deserves. We don't have choices anymore. Not till this is over. All we get is Sunday. She lets us have that. Probably because Sundays are lousy days to do this stuff. I mean, who wants to see an easy girl on a Sunday? That makes sense. I thought about my own request. Did she agree to it, or did it just kind of happen? Tommy asked her for it. She didn't really answer, but neither of us has gotten a Sunday morning call since. During the rest of the week, he and I just worked together. It was none of my business, really, but I asked, "So how does Tommy feel about you earning extra money, anyway?" She actually smiled a little. He gets it. Like I said, what choice do we have? I have to show up on the street regularly anyway, or everybody would think I'm a cop. That'd be a real bad idea, even with them knowing I'm protected. You could fake it for a while, maybe, but not day after day, year after year. Tommy understands, and I use condoms every time. Maintaining your cover. Yeah, that. She flicked the lid on her cake box up and down a few times, then looked sharply at me before glancing down at the box lid. I looked down at my own. The inside of the lid was covered with writing. She looked immensely sad for a second, then got up, stuffing her box in the bag, and walked to the door. I'm just tired today, Spooks. Thanks for listening. Sometimes I just need someone to talk to. And she was out. I stared at the box lid while pretending to study a map of Arlington. Spooks, if anything happens to me, take care of Tommy. He doesn't deserve any of this. He's not so good with money, so I need you to help him. Please. Amber. The rest of the note detailed where she had been hiding the cash from her cover nights. She couldn't tell Tommy where the money was. Addicts are addicts, even if you love them. I realized I was the only choice she had. I had to ask myself, in what kind of world do I become the one to trust? Amber never mentioned it again after that, but Tommy did, sort of. On the way back from a job, he pulled into a diner parking lot without warning, saying he'd missed lunch and was getting the shakes from not eating. We sat in a booth and stared at each other for a few minutes. Amber says she talked to you about us. Yes. We're not stupid, Spooky. We know how this probably ends. One of us dies, both of us die, or they decide we're not useful anymore. There wasn't much to say to that. I just wanted to ask you to take care of Amber if something happens to me. She's a good kid, got messed up by that asshole boyfriend of hers. He put her on the street, made her carry drugs. He gave a crooked, gap-toothed smile. Somebody's got to look out for her. She has a knack for picking loser boyfriends. You think you're just another bad choice? His smile faded. Seriously, is there any way I'd ever be a good choice? I'm only clean 1 day a week. I can manage that, but I'm a full-blown tweaker. 1 bad day away from an overdose. I've seen enough ODs working in the ER to know where I'm headed. He shook his head in a jittery, nervous way. And I have a lot of bad days, Spooky. She thinks you're a good choice. Then you're probably smarter than me or her. Just take care of her, will you? I'll probably get sick of Chicken Vindaloo, but if anything happens, I'll keep an eye on her. His red, too bright eyes smiled. Thanks. Don't tell her I asked, okay? The way he said it, he didn't know she'd already asked me to take care of him. The world seemed a tiny bit less shitty when we walked out of that diner. 3 days later, I had to break into a house, make it look like a burglary, steal a laptop and anything else that seemed spur of the moment. It was a spectacular house, marble and exotic wood everywhere, rich people spending money just to show how rich they are. I found the laptop, then took some jewelry from an armoire and small electronics. On my way out, I saw a wine refrigerator in the kitchen and grabbed a couple of champagne bottles. I handed the laptop over to the ever-waiting van and dumped the electronics and jewelry in a storm drain. The next morning was Sunday, and I did something I thought I'd never do. I knocked on Amber's door at 10. She answered in jeans and a big flannel shirt. No makeup, hair pulled back. This was Tommy's girl, The real girl I'd only seen glimpses of before. She was wearing a ring I'd never seen, a small diamond band, an engagement ring. Of course, she would only wear that on Sundays. She stood there studying me, her face utterly impassive. I'd broken the one rule she'd asked me to keep. I missed the party, but I had to give you guys an engagement gift. I held out a bottle to her. She took it without looking, smiling a real smile. Then she stepped forward, hugged me fiercely, and whispered, "Thank you." She let me go and stood back, uncertain. I shrugged. I have to get going, but give Tommy a hug for me. I walked away before she felt obliged to invite me in. But I was smiling as I heard the door close behind me. Not everyone gets to celebrate their engagement, even if it's years late with a 1959 Dom Perignon rose. Understandable, considering it goes for $40,000 a bottle on a good day. I wondered if they'd ever look at the label, but I didn't really care. It's the thought that counts. That night, I heard giggles and laughter well into the night. 4 days later, the laptop turned up at a pawn shop with classified weapons plans on it. The homeowner was arrested, and it was all over the newspapers. Donna wasn't even pretending to hide it from me anymore. You roll the dice every day, step off the curb into the crosswalk without looking, change lanes without thinking. Most of the time, nothing happens, but once in a while, you roll snake eyes. 7 years, 6 months. It was supposed to be an easy job, another swallow game. Maybe I'd grown jaded over the last couple of years, but I wasn't nervous at all. Just give the distraction time to work, maybe 10 minutes, and copy the cell phone memory and SIM card, like usual. It was on the 3rd floor of the hotel, a corner suite. I glanced at the nearly empty lobby as I walked past the front, then headed around to the back loading dock. I had already rigged that lock earlier in the day, disconnecting the alarm and making sure my stolen punch code worked. The door was already partly open, just half an inch, but enough that the latch hadn't caught. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. My root was blown. But something pushed me forward through the door. I glanced at the green lights on the alarm panel just to be sure. Then I crossed the loading dock and headed up the maintenance stairs. Tommy was lying on the 3rd flight of stairs, awkwardly sprawled, feet toward the 3rd floor landing, head down. His eyes were wide open, unblinking. A hole just above his right eye ringed with black burn marks. Not much blood. He didn't look scared or angry or anything, really. Just blank. Like an upside-down doll on the stairs. I sprinted the rest of the way, the pulsing sound of blood in my ears drowning out everything. The key card worked perfectly, just as it was supposed to. I burst in, ready to swing my electronics-laden backpack at anyone in the way. I was too late, and just as I somehow knew it would be, it was Amber. She was slumped on a couch where she'd managed to pull herself. She hadn't even gotten undressed, and her clothes were soaked with blood. I pushed her over, desperate to help, but as soon as I saw her blank eyes, I knew it was too late. No last words. Another broken doll tossed aside. I stood up, shaking, and caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror behind the bar, looking past the whiskey bottle and ginger ale. Pale, wide-eyed, another doll waiting to be broken. I looked at my bloody hands for a minute and began to woodenly clean up, making sure I left no prints. I took one last look at Amber, touching her hair. I stood slowly, straightened up, and walked out. Down at a gas station, I called the number in my notepad. It was off schedule, but that had to mean something to them. There was a click on the other end, but no voice. It went bad. Two dead. I hung up. Not knowing what would happen next, I headed back to my room. I had barely sat down on the bed when the phone rang. "Out front, 10 minutes." A carpet cleaning service van pulled up, and the side door opened. I got in and caught a glimpse of Jackson as he put a black cloth hood over my head. I didn't fight it. I didn't care anymore. Wherever we were, we parked in a parking garage. I was walked through several doors and sat in a chair. Nobody tied my hands or put handcuffs on me. They could sense that I'd given up. When the hood came off, it was Donna who removed it. We were in some kind of office, a pretty nice one. What happened? I numbly recounted the events. My voice seemed too steady, too far away. A couple of minutes later, a guy with a hooked mustache and a build like an MMA fighter came in. Donna looked over at him. The op is blown. The Swallow and the delivery man are both KIA. Shit. We can use blackmail, tell him there were witnesses. That's about it. Give him a month to stew on it, then spring it on him. Cut him a deal, a cover-up in exchange for the information on the dual-use tech. The guy nodded, then looked over at me with narrowed eyes. This is the nobody girl? That's her. He studied me for a second. I was starting to think she wasn't real. I'm not even sure she's real, Donna said, turning to me and handing me the hood. I need you to put this on. They're going to take you back to your room. She paused. I would have let them go in a few months. I really would have. She said it quietly, like she needed me to believe that. Like maybe she needed to believe it herself. I sat in my room for 2 days, trying to catch my breath, trying to think, trying to figure out why I was even doing this. Let them kill me. It didn't matter. Eventually, I managed to walk over to Amber's room and let myself in. It was locked, but locks barely slowed me down anymore. Amber's room was a little better than mine. At least her bathroom had an actual door. But she'd done things. Put up pictures, set out items that made the room feel more like a little home. A champagne bottle held a bunch of flowers on a small cafe table with 2 chairs. Her closet was divided into 2 parts. On one side were gaudy, flashy outfits with high-heeled boots and shoes. On the other side were jeans, t-shirts, flannel shirts, and a couple of sets of clothes set apart from everything else. A pretty pale blue dress and a man's suit with a nice shirt and tie. I wondered if they ever went out like that, or if they just dressed up for Sunday dinners together. It didn't matter, I supposed. As long as it was Sunday. I touched everything, looked through everything, and I didn't find anything that helped. I went back to my room and lay awake for hours. It hurt. I'd never felt like this before. I couldn't explain it, couldn't describe it. Anger, so much anger. At first it was aimed at Donna, but Donna hadn't done this to them. She'd taken advantage of it, but she'd just repurposed some ruined lives. I waited until after 5 in the morning, after any possible phone call, and slipped out. I left everything but some clothes and headed out to keep some promises. Amber's stash of money was in a bunch of plastic baggies in a hotel rooftop water tank. $17,000. She must have saved nearly every dime of her cover money. I had places to go. Fuck Donna. I waited in the condo for hours, waiting for him to get home, listening to him shower and fix himself a last drink before turning in. Warren Gervais, age 38. Occupation: nightclub owner, pimp and drug supplier. Former boyfriend of Amber Coyle. I'd watched him for over a week. I was practically living in his condo with him. He kept on driving, ruining lives, and screwing people over. I looked for any sign of redemption, anything that might make him worthwhile. I didn't want to find any, but I made myself look, for Amber's sake. She'd gotten a bit of redemption, and she'd have wanted anyone to have a chance at it. She was a better person than me. It didn't matter. There just wasn't any good to find. He fell deeply asleep, courtesy of the GHB I put in his drink. Just for the irony of it, I bought it at his own nightclub from one of his own pushers. When he finally woke up, he was tied up in the middle of his own living room. As confused as he was waking up like that, it got worse when I walked over to where he could see me. "Hello, Warren?" I pulled out a small photo of Amber and held it up for him. It had taken some looking, but I'd found an old high school yearbook picture of her. "You remember Amber? Nod if you do." He shook his head violently. "Bullshit. I know you do. You whored her out. You used her. You ruined her life." He stopped. "I just wanted you to know that she found someone and was happy. She'd probably have forgiven you." A look of hope, of relief, flickered in his eyes. "She probably would have. But I'm not her. I don't think I've had 4 real friends in my whole life, and what you did to her killed her. Eventually." He started to try to squirm out of his bonds. I walked around behind him and stood on one end of the stocking that was loosely tied around his neck, then rolled the other end around my gloved hands. Burn in hell, Warren. Tommy's ex and her husband were harder to find. I had less to go on, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. Tommy wouldn't have wanted the kid to suffer for something her mom did. The girl was 15, so she could probably survive without parents, but Tommy would have been horrified if I'd sent her down a path that would likely end up like mine or Amber's. Tommy's ex wasn't a nurse anymore, just another full-time trophy wife to a rich doctor. She spent her days doing the rich bitch shit that trophy wives do. Charities, spa treatments, CrossFit, yoga, spin classes, finding themselves in art, whatever the hell that means. The doctor spent most of his time working for a research hospital and lecturing. Most of his time. He had hobbies too. I was waiting for her when she walked out of the shower into their bedroom. Have a seat, Carrie. She looked at the automatic and sat. Good puppy. Who are you? You know what a guardian angel is, right? She nodded, wide-eyed. I'm the opposite. I'm here to personally fuck up your life. She started to speak, but I cut her off. Shh. I looked at her. Nothing special at all. Nothing to drive a man over the edge like Tommy had gone. I don't know what the fuck Tommy saw in you. She had no idea who I was, but she could feel my anger, and she thought on her feet. We didn't want what happened. I wanted to let Tommy down gently, but I didn't realize Katerina would be a blue baby. That gave it all away. Were you even planning on telling him? Roger and I weren't sure what we were going to do. The whole thing, Tommy and I were on different shifts all the time. Roger and I just started flirting, and it ended up out of control. So you sent him to prison. I didn't plan that. Roger was angry. You know he's paralyzed. He'll never walk again. He deserves it. He earned it. Was Tommy supposed to be okay with your shit? She looked down at her feet, fidgeting. I thought we could sit down and work it out. I don't know how, but Tommy was always good at compromise. I just wanted you to know that Tommy died a hero, a real one, like you see in comic books. He sacrificed himself. Maybe not on purpose. Maybe he didn't really know, but I knew who we were working for. I knew what we were doing. She paled. He's dead? He and his wife died together. Close enough, anyway. She sucked in her breath. I didn't know he was married again. We lost track of him years ago. She was totally his, no matter how bad it got. And it was a hell of a lot harder than a few months of different shifts. 100 of you wouldn't be worth one amber. She at least had the grace to look guilty. So, here's the deal. You get 3 more years. On the day after Katerina graduates, I'm sending Roger these. I tossed pictures down in front of her. Images of her in compromising situations with her physical trainer. You're a fucking cliché. You made this easy. I've seen the prenup. Totally one-sided, and you'll get fuck all in the divorce. And just so you know. I tossed another set of pictures down. Roger never walked again after his encounter with Tommy, but his equipment worked just fine. These pictures showed a dizzying array of nubile young med students earning extra credit in very inventive ways. Most were female, but certainly not all. I wasn't too surprised at what I'd found. I'd spent years following people, many of them rich and privileged. Faithfulness wasn't too common in their world. Hypocrisy was, though. You two should call the CDC. Start a study. Neither one of you seems to know what a condom is. How the hell you haven't caught anything is beyond me. Maybe you can use these to try to break the prenup, after Katerina graduates. If you do anything before that, I'll kill both you and Roger. I mean that. She looked at the pictures, trying not to hyperventilate. But 3 years, that's it. I left her sitting there, trying to figure out what to do. It wouldn't matter. I had video of both of them. And in 3 years, I'd made arrangements with a lawyer for sealed envelopes to go to everyone I could think of. University boards, hospital and charity directors, newspapers. They'd be ostracized at best. It would all be hypocrisy, of course. Few of the indignant voices of condemnation would come from anyone who wasn't just as dirty. But that's how witch-burning works. Point at someone else, someone who's made a mistake, and scream, heretic, so nobody does it to you. Besides, As long as I was still alive, I planned on coming back as often as necessary to make sure their lives stayed screwed up in new and interesting ways. Everybody needs a hobby. If I hadn't been so pissed off, I would have gone after Morton Gallagher, Esquire, before the others. I hadn't forgotten the ginger ale highballs. Donna must have figured out what was going to happen. I'd been in his house before, but when I cased it this time, the security systems were state-of-the-art. The type of systems you'd find in an embassy, brand new. Most of it wasn't available to the public. Even the insanely rich Gallaghers couldn't have bought it. But Donna wanted him alive. If I'd had a few special pieces of equipment, I'd have ghosted right through it. But I didn't. I settled in to watch. For weeks, he barely left the house at all. But most people can't live like that for long, especially an uber-rich asshole who was used to having everything his way. So I used a different tool, one I did have. Brandon had called it tactical patience. I could almost feel Morty going stir-crazy, losing his mind to boredom. He lasted almost another month. I waited. I wanted to make sure he wasn't bait. Patience. I knew where he was going anyway. Morty needed to feel like a big man. It took me a few hours to find the hotel, always the honeymoon suite, complete with a hot tub. For another month, I watched over him, checking for surveillance teams, slipping in and out of the hotel, watching for anything out of the ordinary. Finally, I was convinced. Donna had either decided I wasn't a threat or had hung him out to dry. I waited until the working girl left his room. From the way she was holding her face, he needed more than a few squeals to feel like a big man now. She was skinny, wearing a bleach blonde wig along with her fresh bruises. He was sitting in the hot tub, pretty buzzed when I slipped in. A lot more than a few highballs, barely able to focus his eyes on me when I stepped in. I held the gun on him. "Stay in the tub." "What?" "Oh, what are you here for?" "For Amber and Tommy." He looked lost. "Who's Tommy?" "The guy on the stairs." "Wait, that woman, the one with the guards, she said we had a deal. She'd cover it up if I got her what she wanted." "I'm not her. Why did you do it?" He looked around desperately, looking for a way out. "I was so high. I don't even remember it very well. I remember doing it, but I don't remember why." He shook his head. "I tried to leave the back way and ran into the guy on the stairs." I didn't say anything. "Shit, you are her, aren't you? The one she warned me about." I could see panic setting in. What does it matter? It was just a goddamn easy girl. I almost shot him right then, but his leg kicked up in front of me, and I grabbed it, lifting as his head ducked under the water. I shoved the gun in my jacket pocket and lifted with both hands. He fought, but he had no traction, and I was standing on dry ground. He tried to kick my hand away, but that didn't last long. Too stoned, too drunk. He couldn't keep his head above water. All he could do was splash. For a while. I held his leg up until a few minutes had passed without movement, let his leg fall back in, turned the tub up to max heat, dropped the whiskey bottle and another into the hot tub. I hung the Do Not Disturb sign on the door on my way out. I could have run, Mexico City maybe, easy to hide in 9 million people. But I didn't really want to. I could have a purpose here. It took months to find her, of course, months to decipher her patterns and movements, to identify the right contacts and shadow them. As wary and cautious as they were still vulnerable. It was a red brick warehouse with an underground parking garage near Georgetown, marked with a dull blue and dark red sign that read Calliope, Ltd. There was no fence, just a low brick wall around the building adorned with concrete planters full of flowers, security measures to deter potential threats. I surveyed the area, spotting numerous cameras and sensors. I contemplated whether to find a way to slip inside or to wait until Donna left and tail her home. But then I realized the right approach was neither. This plan would either succeed or fail on its own merits. I headed into Georgetown and purchased a smart charcoal gray business suit with a skirt. It was a first for me, and I relied on the shop assistants to guide me through selecting shoes and a purse to match. Next, I indulged in getting my hair styled and my nails done. These were new experiences for me, but I believed in presenting myself well, especially when attending a funeral, even if it might be my own. Confident in my appearance, I strode up to the security guard shack at the entrance. "I'm here to see Donna," I stated firmly to the security guard at the gate. He regarded me with casual amusement. "Is she expecting you?" "I think so. And who should I say is here?" "Nobody." His demeanor shifted instantly, amusement replaced by alertness. He scanned the parking lot and subtly touched the grip of his handgun while signaling into his mic. "Central, this is Gate. The nobody girl is here. She wants in." I couldn't hear the response through his earpiece, but within moments, 4 more guards appeared, 2 armed with shotguns. They scrutinized my business suit, a far cry from the ragged appearance they likely anticipated. One guard ran a metal detector over me before they escorted me inside. In a hallway, a man with a hooked mustache intercepted us, dismissing the guards with a wave. He raised an eyebrow at my attire, then guided me deeper into the building to an outer office, where a poised and efficient-looking black woman sat typing at a computer. The man smirked and gestured towards a chair in front of the secretary. "Wait here." As soon as the door to the inner office closed, the secretary leaned in and whispered urgently, "Don't take any shit from her. She needs you." "Why?" I asked, incredulous. "You are the nobody girl. They say if it can't be done, if there's no way in, nobody can do it. Nobody sees everything. Nobody can handle it. They've been using you for the hardest targets out there for years now. Bargain for whatever you want." "Why are you telling me this?" "Amber and Tommy were my friends a long time ago. I'm Candy. Alive. Candy was alive." Maybe Donna meant it when she said she planned to let them go. I kept glancing at the door to Donna's office, mouth in a grim line. They saved me from myself, but they were willing to let the asshole that killed Amber and Tommy go. But you weren't, were you? "They were the only friends I've ever had." She smiled with a curled lip. "He prepaid for 5 days at the hotel. He was pretty much stewed meat by the time they went looking for him." Before I could respond, the door opened and the guy gestured me in. I sat in the chair in front of her desk while the big guy leaned against the doorway. Donna took off her reading glasses and looked me over. She noticed the suit, similar to hers, and I knew she got the message. I was done being just the raggedy girl, except as a disguise. I might not be her equal here, but I knew I was valuable. "Why are you here?" she demanded. "Because you need me, and I think I need to do this. I don't know who we are, but I know some of what we've been doing, and I know somebody has to do it." "You go off the reservation again. I absolutely will have you killed." The guy at the door smirked and mouthed the words, "If she can find you," at me. I got the instant impression he'd known her for a long time and loved pulling her chain when he could. I kept a straight face. Donna sighed. "When we learned you'd killed Gervais, we knew you'd be coming for Gallagher sooner or later, and I was pretty sure you'd get to him, no matter what we did short of putting him in Guantanamo. I don't have the manpower to cover him forever, and he wouldn't take the custody deal, so we wrung him out as fast as we could." A grim smile. Since he had the consistency of wet dog food by the time we found him, it was for the best. "What does nobody want?" Her face hardened, and her eyes flickered to something on the corner of her desk. "What?" "Tommy and Amber to be married." A glimmer of confusion, then understanding. "It'll be registered in Virginia, dated from when they started working for me." She smiled softly, a side of her I hadn't seen before. "They're already side by side. I buried her in that blue dress, wearing her ring, and him in his suit. I'll have the headstones changed." We both ignored the tears that started sliding down my cheeks, but she studied me intently for a long few seconds. "Here's a freebie." She reached out and turned a picture on that corner of her desk around. 4 people standing in a line with their arms around each other, wearing aloha shirts, flowered leis, and laughing. The white-haired man had his arm draped across Donna's shoulders. "He goes by Pogo. Maybe, in a few years, if you play everything straight, I'll tell you where he lives. It'd serve him right." There was a glint of wicked humor in her eyes, Seeing his picture sent a flutter through my stomach, something not entirely unpleasant. I pushed it away as best I could. Do I get to ask who we are now? The Cumulus program, we're the guys in the basement, she explained. She nodded towards the guy at the door. He runs green for me, the more presentable part of the program. I oversee the whole thing and directly manage red. That's you. She meant it when she said dirty work. Honey traps, badger games, blackmail, murders in back alleys, whatever it took to win. The targets were human versions of cancer. Terrorists, arms traders, human traffickers, cancers that had to be found and removed, using disposable people to do it. People who went unmissed, unloved, and unmourned, at least most of the time. It would take me a long while to fully understand how dirty it had to be sometimes, but somebody had to do it. Or nobody.